Greetings and good evening, beautiful people. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you're having a fantastic day and week. Welcome to our live weekly YouTube readings of the final report of the California Reparations Task Force right here on the CJEC YouTube channel. This is the only live reading of the California Reparations Task Force final report on YouTube. The final report of the first in the nation California Reparations Task Force is one of, if not the most important government reports about the Black American community since the 1960s. Equally important is also the foundation for current and future reparations legislation in California. The report is nearly 1,100 pages long, and we're bringing every page of it to you, chapter by chapter, every week on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so that you are properly educated in your advocacy for reparations in California. Today's reading of the final report is presented to you as a community service with the support from the Reparations Organizing and Mobilizing Team at the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. CJEC is California's leading grassroots organization born for reparations and reparative justice for Black American freedmen living in California. For more information on CJEC and our work helping to enact the law that created the California Reparations Task Force, California's law requiring the state agencies to collect data on descendants of U.S. slavery, the Act to End Current Slavery in California, state prisons, the California Freedmen Affairs Bill, and more, visit www.cjec-official.org. Before we go any further, right now, I need you to do three things. First, connect to our YouTube channel by liking this video, hitting the bell for reminders, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Second, get connected to us on social media by following CJEC on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter at CJEC Official. Finally, get informed and involved. To do that, visit www.cjec-official.org to sign up for current and accurate California reparations news and info on our Get Involved page, and support our work by volunteering and/or donating. To donate, just click the Donate tab on the homepage of our website. Special thanks to our amazing fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project. You can learn more about our fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project, at www.cabwhp.org. By way of introduction, my name is Iris Peoples. I live in Santa Rosa, and I am from the Bay Area. And I'm a volunteer reparations advocate with CJEC's Reparations Organizing and Mobilizing Team. The agenda for today, Chapter 24, Policies Addressing Racism in Environment and Infrastructure, of the final report of the California Reparations Task Force. The title of the chapter we're going to read tonight, again, is Policies Addressing Racism in Environment and Infrastructure. You can follow along in the reading, download tonight's chapter, or the full final report yourself by going to our website, www.cjec-official.org/reports. Okay, we're about ready to start our reading. But before we do, I have some special thanks and announcements to make. First, as always, I would like to thank our good friends at ETM Media Group on YouTube for the live readings of the first California Reparations Report. You can watch their readings of the first report on their channel at ETM Media Group on YouTube and our website at www.cjec-official.org/videos. Second, for those of you who don't know, historic reparations legislation in California is here and more is coming. SB 490 is California's first lineage-based reparations-related legislation to establish the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. The bill was introduced by State Senator Stephen Bradford and will move forward this year. To read the bill, visit www.cjec-official.org/advocacy. Third, as mentioned, more historic reparations bills are coming. Over the next several months, more reparations bills will be written. During this 2024 legislative session, we'll see those bills introduced and start moving towards passage by majorities of both the California State Assembly and Senate. To pass the reparations bill in 2024, we need 41 assembly members and 21 senators to say yes. When those bills are passed, we need our governor to sign the bills. So to make the reparations a reality in California, the math is 41 plus 21 plus 1. That's 41 assembly members, 21 senators, and 1 governor. 41 plus 21 plus 1 equals reparations in California. Lastly, but not least, special thanks to CJEC's reparations organizing and mobilizing team, specifically our volunteer final report readers. And without further ado, Chapter 24 of the California Reparations Task Force final report. Chapter 24, Policies Addressing Racism in Environment and Infrastructure. 1. Policy recommendations. This chapter details the policy proposals to address the harms set forth in Chapter 7, Racism in Environment and Infrastructure. Increase green space access and recreation opportunities in African American communities. Test for and eliminate toxicity in descendant communities. Increase trees in redlined and descendant communities. Develop climate resilience hubs in redlined and descendant communities. Remove lead in drinking water. Prevent highway expansion and mitigate transportation pollution. Address food injustice. See Chapter 29 for the text of this recommendation. Increase green space access and recreation opportunities in African American communities. African Americans in California experience a lack of access to urban parks and green space. Federal, state, and local segregation laws historically exclude African Americans from outdoor recreation. This systemic racism, coupled with interpersonal discrimination, has led to an underrepresentation of African Americans in outdoor recreation, nature, and environmentalism. Access to green space and recreation opportunities is critical to physical and mental well-being and a healthier lifestyle. Studies have found that diminished access to parks correlate with disproportionate heat exposure and reduced health benefits. Additionally, exposure to green spaces reduces risks of high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, respiratory failure, and several other health harms, and provides benefits such as improved pregnancy outcomes and sleep duration. The harms of systemic racism, especially historically racist urban planning policies that produce inequitable access to green space exposure for African American Californians, have not yet been corrected. The task force recommends that legislature fund the development of local parks in African American communities with special consideration for descendant communities to acquire land, build and renovate parks, purchase play equipment, support programming, and build indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, e.g., fields, playgrounds, basketball and tennis courts, ice rinks, public pools. Include African American communities with special consideration for descendants as stakeholders in the process of creating and programming parks to develop universally accessible park designs and increase access to parks for African Americans with special consideration for descendants and support the work of community-based organizations to ensure the safe access to neighborhood level physical activity spaces and services, e.g. public parks, and playgrounds. Test for and eliminate toxicity in descendant communities. 70% of hazardous waste sites listed on the National Priorities List, NPL, under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, CERCLA or Superfund, are located within 1 mile of federally assisted housing. Communities that live in federally assisted housing are disproportionately Black. Proximity to a contaminated site during flooding events can expose nearby residents to hazardous pollutants and groundwater contamination. Disproportionately African American disadvantaged communities face greater risks from sea level rise and subsequent climate change flooding than the general population. In California, they are 5 times more likely to live within a half a mile of a toxic site that could flood by 2050. The task force recommends the legislature amend existing state law to one, require coordination between the Department of Toxic Substances Controlled, DTSC, and water boards, the State Water Resources Control Board, and regional quality control boards collectively to allocate resources and remediate contaminated sites with a high flood risk where descendant communities are specifically located. 2, expand the definition of vulnerable community used in the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative to include descendant communities as a category. And 3, allow tenants to terminate their lease early if their housing is on or within 1/2 mile of a toxic site. The legislature should direct the California Environmental Contaminant Biomonitoring Program, also called Biomonitoring California, to develop a program to conduct environmental exposure screenings in public housing adjacent to Superfund sites in a manner that is readily available to communities. Screenings should be mobile, offered directly in the community before and after school and work hours, and provided in the resident's primary language. In addition to exposure screening, local health departments and organizations should offer environmental sessions for community members about the exposure risks, potential health harms, and opportunities for screening and care using materials created by the California Department of Public Health and Biomonitoring California. Finally, the task force recommends the legislature require local governments with high flood risk zones to develop community action plans to relocate residents in high-risk hazardous flood zones during climate emergencies and offer vouchers for temporary housing, relocation. This should include a notification system that alerts residents whenever land is discovered to have toxic contamination following a climate disaster event. Following a climate emergency, Biomonitoring California should provide free community biomonitoring for toxic chemicals, including lead, mercury, and arsenic, and for elevated levels of natural elements such as iron and zinc for residents living in contaminated communities with a high flood risk. Increase trees in redlined and descendant communities. In the 1930s, the Homeowner Loan Corporation, HOLC, developed neighborhood appraisal maps to assess loan risks, and their legacy correlates with infrastructure, inequality, and housing segregation today. Under that appraisal process, areas with older housing, typically economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, and communities of color were almost always labeled hazardous, outlined in red, and given the lowest grade, D. Today, the same neighborhood that received an A grade gave an A grade have nearly twice as much tree coverage as communities that were redlined by receiving the D grade. Without trees, communities suffer from increased health and environmental hazards. The task force recommends the legislature require local governments to identify redlined and descendant communities within their jurisdiction and make plans to increase tree canopy coverage and access to green space to limit pollution exposure, ameliorate heat island effects, and improve air quality. This proposal would strengthen Senate Bill number 1000 SB 1000. California's current law that requires cities and counties to adopt environmental justice elements or integrate environmental justice policies into their general plans. The task force recommends the legislature further the aims of SB 1000 in the following ways: define disadvantaged communities to include redlined and descendant communities with a D in HOLC rating a minimal tree canopy coverage. Require timelines and deadlines for environmental justice plans with regular public reporting on the progress towards implementation. Require the adoption and regular updating of environmental justice policies regardless of regardless of when other elements are considered, and ensure investments in climate change adaptation projects do not displace residents via, for instance, gentrification by implementing rent control policies tailored to local communities. Develop climate resilience hubs in redlined and descendant communities. African Americans bear some of the greatest risks from climate change, such as increased asthma diagnoses and premature mortality from extreme heat or pollution exposure. Because redline communities suffer disproportionately from extreme heat, the expanding duration and frequency of heat waves due to climate change pose a particular threat to African Americans who are more likely to live in red light areas. Red light communities lack the public infrastructure necessary to adapt to the gravest climate change risks. This task force recommends the legislature provide economic support to ameliorate these disparities through the development of climate resilience hubs, community-driven facilities that support residents, facilitate communication, distribute aid, and provide an opportunity for communities to become more self-sustaining during climate change emergencies. Specifically, the task force recommends the legislature utilize the Transformative Climate Communities TCC program to fund climate resilience hubs. The TCC is operated by the California Strategic Growth Council, a 10-member executive council comprised of 7 state agencies and 3 public members, with funding from California's cap and trade system and California General Fund. The legislature should establish and increase TCC funding to provide grants to redlined and descendant communities to improve infrastructure and climate resiliency and address other health harms associated with the legacy of redlining. The legislature should also invest in retrofitting public buildings to serve climate resilience hubs to respond to community needs caused by climate disaster by providing clean water, food distribution, high-speed internet, electricity, and heat or cool air, among other necessities. The legislature should also require local governments to develop accessible warning alert systems and climate shelters for unhoused residents. At the same time, the legislature must ensure that these environmental investments do not displace residents via, for example, gentrification, by implementing rent control policies tailored to local communities. Developing resilient community infrastructure can lead to increased property values and spur cycles of gentrification that make the now improved communities unaffordable for their original residents. Remove lead in the drinking water. Lead pollution is disproportionately high in African American communities that were segregated through federal redlining. One major lead pollution source is lead service lines, LSL, that deliver drinking water to homes. Replacing LSLs can be prohibitively expensive, costing thousands of dollars. California has addressed the replacement of publicly owned portion of LSLs through legislation, but funding LSL replacement on privately owned properties in less affluent communities remains an issue. Many individual homeowners cannot afford to replace the LSL, and some property owners, refuse to cover the cost of LSL replacement on rental properties. If LSL is replaced on only one side of the water system, it is called a partial replacement. Partial LSL replacements can significantly increase short-term lead exposure in the time after replacement and lead to greater health risks, while also creating a disproportionate burden of health harms on poor communities. The task force recommends the legislature ban partial lead service line replacement and fund full LSL replacement on privately owned property to remove lead in drinking water. The legislature should allocate 40% of the drinking water state revolving fund from the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funds for full lead service line replacement to go directly to African American neighborhoods that were formerly redlined, with special consideration for descendants. To ensure accountability, the legislature should require the state Water Resources Control Board Division of Drinking Water to track federal infrastructure investment and Jobs Act fund distribution to ensure money reaches African American neighborhoods. Prevent highway expansion and mitigate transportation pollution. From the 1950s to the 1970s, the state and federal highway construction targeted blighted neighborhoods and valuable inner city land that tended to be overwhelmingly poor and African American. These highways destroyed African American communities or otherwise suffocated their economic vitality by cutting off their access to the rest of the city. Today, Black communities are disproportionately located near highways and subsequently suffer more from on road sources of carcinogenic pollution. The task force recommends the legislature reduce the pollution burden shouldered by African American communities by ending highway expansion in areas with high levels of pollution. Assembly Bill number 1778, AB 1778, which was passed by Assembly but failed, which was passed by the Assembly but failed in the Senate Transportation Committee, would have prohibited California from funding or permitting freeway expansion or widening transportation projects in disadvantaged communities. AB 1778 would have required the Department of Transportation to consult the California Healthy Places Index, an online resource developed by the Public Health Alliance of Southern California that uses indicators like income level and PM 2.5 pollution to identify disadvantaged communities before initiating any projects. The task force recommends the legislature pass a law tailored to serve the needs of African American communities. And that will conclude tonight's reading of Chapter 24 of the California Reparations Task Force's final report. Before you go, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to A, like this video, B, hit the bell for more reminders, and C, subscribe to our YouTube channel. When you go, don't forget to get connected. Follow CJAC on all social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter at CJAC Official. Get informed. Visit www.cjac-official.org and sign up for current and accurate California reparations news and information on our Get Involved page. Get involved. Support our work by volunteering and or donating. To donating, just click the donate tab on the homepage of our website. Special thanks to our amazing fiscal sponsor, the California Black Women's Health Project. Thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate you all. We are closer to reparations than we have ever been in California. Have a great night.